Good afternoon, everybody. Just so that we don't sit here like potted plants, I thought I would, speak into the microphone and try to get this session going. Welcome back. I'm sure you had a good morning, and I'm sure you're going to have an entertaining hour now and a good afternoon after that. I'm very excited to have with me my longtime colleague and friend, Chuck Todd, of NBC News, and we are going to have a pretty fast-paced, wide-ranging discussion about the political and policy scene here in Washington now. As you all know, Chuck is the White House correspondent for NBC News, and we will take your questions beginning in about 45 minutes or something like that, maybe a little less. We have a hard stop at 2. A few words about Chuck. He is not only the chief White House correspondent for NBC, but he also is the host of the Daily Rundown, which I'm sure you all watch, and I do whenever I can, and I have religiously watched it for the last 2 weeks just so I know what's going on. And that I have to confess that I was in Maine, so that helped with that. But anyway, Chuck became political director for NBC News in March 2007. He serves as on-air analyst for all of the NBC News shows, including the nightly news with Brian Williams today, Meet the Press. He was on Meet the Press yesterday. I'm sure you all watched it, with Tim Pawlenty, the former governor of Minnesota and now presidential candidate, and Tim Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, offering shall I call it instant analysis?
I guess, yeah.
Chuck,
breaking analysis.
Breaking analysis of what had been said there. Chuck is responsible for all of NBC's political coverage. He's the go-to man on all things politics, and he's the editor of First Read, which I get in my email box every morning and read religiously. It's authored by Mark Murray, his colleague mainly, I guess, but is also is a team effort and covers the landscape of politics, what you need to know, what Chuck needs to know as he goes into each day. I want to say that Chuck was my colleague at National Journal Group, and which publishes for a decade or more. He was at the Hotline, which was was and is a terrific publication about politics. And as its editor, he became, one of the most knowledgeable people on politics in this town, no question about it. So I'm so glad that he took time out of his day. He even arranged for Obama to have his news conference today at 11, not at 12:30. So that he could be here with us today.
It was easy to do.
So, Chuck, I want to start with the important question of music. You covered this question on the Daily Rundown last week, and you noted that Michelle Bachmann had been, using the Tom Petty song "American Girl," and I want you to tell us a little bit about your observations about music. But I want to ask you whether there wasn't a double standard on that show, because I noticed that when you went to the segment on the hot dog eating contest, you used the song Hot Diggity Dog.
Right, that's right. Well, it's all about fair use. Everybody knows it's about fair use.
Yeah.
Clearly, he's just trying to demonstrate that he did watch the show for a week straight. We covered the little controversy, Tom Petty deciding it is, artists will make their political decisions. I'm always surprised by this, because I am always surprised that more of them don't abide by the Michael Jordan rule, right? When everybody used to try to get Michael Jordan to get involved in North Carolina politics, there was a big race, Helms-Gantt, probably as divisive of a race that's ever taken place in North Carolina history, and he refused to take sides. And his answer was, Republicans buy sneakers too. It was reportedly his answer. He's like, bitter. He did, after he got out of the game, he did get involved in politics once. He did a fundraiser for Bill Bradley. So basketball ruled on that. But I am always surprised. And to me, it's like those controversies, they get tired of, artists. I understand what they're doing. Most of them worry about the slippery slope, right, which is this idea of what they own. And they don't like this idea that somehow they don't get, that anybody can just license what they do. But my feeling is it's a campaign rally. I can tell you it's about the same 15 songs at every campaign rally. Half of them are YouTube. U2. A third of them end up being Bruce Springsteen. And then there's always signed, sealed, and delivered, right? Stevie Wonder at the end. It always is the case, and it's Democrat, Republican alike.
How about Stevie Nicks and her great story?
Well, and she complained back during the whole, with the Fleetwood Mac complained during Clinton. So it wasn't just, those Hollywood liberal musicians, complaining about Republicans. When Fleetwood Mac complained about Clinton using it, and then, of course, he gets elected and she wants to go to the inaugural. So suddenly,
so that was what
suddenly
was
she
that?
became entertainment at the inaugural. That was a pretty good deal.
That was Can't Stop Thinking About Tomorrow.
Don't stop, don't stop
thinking about tomorrow. Yeah, for those of you who don't remember that song. All right.
Well, there's a lighthearted way to start.
Yeah. Okay. Should we sing now?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I have several categories of questions about the White House, about Congress, and so on. Let's start with the White House, and we're going to get to the deficit in a minute. But it's my observation that increasingly the White House seems to be centralizing power over time.
They are.
And that it's all, a lot of what the White House does is to organize its day and its program around the president's need to be seen in the media, that he himself is being postured for constant media attention, and that sort of governs what the White House does to a large extent. Is that true, or do you think, or how do you see the White House in its relations with the media?
Well, I'll take that question separately because you also introduced an idea here that I think is very true also. Yeah. It started in the Bush White House, and I think the Obama White House continue it, and this is centralization of the executive branch, of decisions being made in that West Wing more and more. I'll just ask a show of hands. When's the last time any of you saw the Commerce Secretary do a TV interview? When's the last time you saw, they don't even put them out for media anymore. And they don't use the cabinet to even move message, to talk about message. That's a whole separate issue, but, and I thought that's where that question was going, but as for the media, their philosophy is they believe there's no one place to go. Obviously they know that that's what the new media universe is about. So they have to design their media events in a way that they feel as if they can get as much penetration as possible. So they'll do a Twitter town hall, and they know we in the, quote, mainstream media will mock it because there's no tough questions, but in their minds, they're getting a whole bunch of people that don't watch evening news. They'll do a daytime press conference to get cable. They'll do the nighttime press conference to try to get some broadcast, because they know at any moment that's still the biggest way to get to 30 or 40 million if they ask for it. So they just feel as if they have to, sometimes it takes 2 events a day to penetrate in a way, and frankly, it probably takes more than that, but that's as much as they do. But the second part of your question, or I think that you were alluding to, is it's not just they've centralized all of the media and the communication shop, and therefore they've essentially centralized power and centralized influence, where I don't believe that Tom Vilsack has the type of power that some of his predecessors had in running the agricultural department. It's just they don't allow these. I think cabinet secretary, their political point is they need some room in the communications business and in the press to have their own little bully pulpit, and they're getting no shot at doing that right now. And I think that goes to a little bit of the decision to centralize things a little bit, but also gets to this media thing. They feel like they have such a hard time getting the president to penetrate. They don't want to have too many other speakers penetrating at the same time.
Well, actually, that was my second question, and as you suggested, I sort of conflated them. But let's dwell for a minute on this whole question of the cabinet. How would you say Obama's relationship is with his cabinet members? And, so far we haven't seen a huge amount of turnover, right? Gates is gone.
I would say it's a normal amount of turnover is what we've had, nothing out of the ordinary.
Yeah, and but are his relations with the cabinet good, non-existent? Does he ever have a cabinet meeting? What's their function? What's their role?
Well, it is one of the things that Bill Daley was supposedly going to bring in is, as a former cabinet secretary, he would, I can't tell you how many times he said it to me. I've had others say it to me, oh, we're going to use the cabinet more, we're going to use the cabinet more, we're going to put the cabinet out there, and they haven't. And there's always a reason, right? You put out Janet Napolitano, she's going to get asked some TSA question that they don't want to be dealing with. because TSA is the punching bag for America these days. They don't want to put out Eric Holder. They don't want to talk about Gitmo. You know, they basically have a small circle of cabinet folks that they do trust, with Geithner. It's probably their best economic spokesman now. And to think where he started when it came to at a communication level. And obviously the national security cabinet, part of the cabinet, he deals with extensively. You know, they always make sure to let us know on the schedule that he's meeting when he has his weekly Gates meeting or his weekly Clinton meeting. Now, Biden does most of the cabinet outreach. That is sort of Biden's job. He does a lot of that, and you filter, and the cabinet has learned that if you've got an issue you want to bring to the president, you go through Daley, you go through Biden, and then it gets to the president. But I would say the cabinet's uneasy, and I'll tell you, they're really nervous. If Geithner is allowed to go, allowed to leave, essentially, and I can tell you there's a lot of pressure being put on him not to leave. He's got, I do believe, this is one of those cases, it truly is his family. His family's moving back to New York. I think that, you know, the idea of a year, it's his son's senior year in high school. I mean, there's a lot of compelling family reasons for him to leave. But I think they have been arm-twisting cabinet members not to leave. There's a whole bunch, you know, they were given a window. They were told if you were going to leave, they were said, you know, you can leave between, essentially, announce your decision to exit between October and February, October of 10, and, you know, and if you didn't raise your hand, you're staying through the election. Because you don't want
confirmation hearing.
Can you exactly imagine Geithner? Yeah. Imagine politically what this White House would be dealing with if Obama's entire economic record is put to test in a confirmation hearing. That's just a messaging disaster for them, and they know it. And let alone if, you know, if Napolitano's not burned out, then she's not human, right? I don't think anybody has a more thankless job. Worst job in Washington, I think, is the head of Homeland Security. You know, when you, on any given day, you have some idiotic TSA story you got to deal with, right? Never mind the actual stuff that she's got to worry about on the border right now, everything that's going on in the Mexican drug war, and of course, it's an agency that still has no definition, but we could, you know, debate that. So I think their concern is if Geithner goes, and all of a sudden there's 2 or 3 others, and then that actually really can hurt the president's reelection, right? Because then you can't make the continuity argument, and that's sort of one of the arguments he is going to try to make, which is, you know, hey, we're in the middle of implementing, we're in the middle of doing this, we're not done yet, you know. It's like what every incumbent president runs on, you know, be careful, you know, we're not finished, we still got work to do. Well, if you end up with a whole new cabinet, you could create this atmosphere. Well, it's easy to change. It's easy to flip over. It's easy to turn over. We're not going to harm the country.
So Gates was pretty out front. They put him out front. He was vocal on a lot of stuff. But Hillary, you don't see her much. Why?
I think that she has carved out this role in a way. Look, their relationship is very cordial. It's very professional. It's not personal. They've not gotten close. She and Vice President Biden are very close. She and Gates were close. She and Mullen were close. And she and Panetta are very close. So I think it's more of this is who she is. This was the way she was in the Senate. She wasn't very vocal in the Senate when she was a senator. So I think we expect somebody that ran for president. I think a lot of times when it comes to Hillary, too many of my colleagues in the media assume she's like Bill. Bill would be inserting himself all over the place. That's not who she is. She is different. That is, you know, she's not Bill. I have heard, you know, stories of, you know, Bill will get upset if the president's doing some event that steps on him somewhere. You know, you're just like, you know, that is just not who Secretary Clinton is. Okay. And it's not, and it's actually, when you look at, you're right, she's not that vocal, but when you look at her Senate career, it's actually very consistent.
Okay, now, Chuck, I'm going to tell you about a little poll that we did. Our government executive did a poll of people like the people in this room, senior people in the civil service, and we asked them to rate, to give us a grade point average, okay, on the political appointees of the Obama administration. and we asked them to compare that grade point rating to the appointees of the Bush administration. The Obama appointees got what one would have to think of as kind of a low GPA, 1.85. 1.85, isn't that a D? Anyway, it's close to a D.
C minus.
C minus is yeah.
Gentleman C.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I'm not sure. I think it's a D plus myself, but anyway, I don't know. I'm not too good at the translation.
We don't give
here.
Ds anymore, right? Isn't that
Oh,
what
that's
they do?
true. Yeah. And versus the Bush appointees who got a 2.18, so 1 point. That's not all that high either, but it's a decline from the Bush years. So I think that the people like whom we surveyed, who are much like the people in this room, don't think that highly of the political appointees that have been named by the Obama administration. I wonder whether you have any thoughts about that.
Well, look, I can only offer theories. Number one, I can tell you the confirmation process is out of control. There's too many political appointees. I do know that there are some efforts being made of trying to streamline this, and I think when that happens, that might improve things a little bit. But the confirmation process does scare away quality people, and anybody that doesn't. I mean, when you look at everything they go through, and you look at what happened, particularly in that first couple of months, just like every presidential administration, it seems like every one of them deals with this, but he had a couple that went really sour. Daschle was the most high profile, but a couple of Treasury folks. The original chief performance officer got dinged on taxes. Well, all of a sudden, you know, I think there was a lot of people who thought, oh, Obama's going to bring in this age of another round of the best and the brightest. Well, nobody came. You know, after a while, it was because I think they took one look at what the Senate Finance Committee, what it does on background checks is ridiculous. And I think that's got to go. That's got to get streamlined. And, you know, that is why Treasury was, I think, just unmanaged for so long. It explains why HHS has taken forever took forever to get up and running, because somehow Senate Finance had a hand in that. It's like wherever Senate Finance, you know, they did the TSA pat-downs, let's just put it that way, when it comes to confirmation hearing. And so that, I think that contributes to it. I think you have the fact that I would assume people are upset at the political appointees because they're frustrated that there isn't a budget, that we're still operating on these continuing resolutions. And so therefore, the professionals, the government professionals who want to start a project and then find that they can't, and they go to the political appointee, and they throw up their hands and saying, look, we're trying, I mean, and yet you don't see any action. Well, what are you going to grade them? I mean, so there's plenty of excuses, I think, that go into that, and I think, I assume that's just a little piece of it.
Right. So, all right, so let's move down a level.
I think we all expected him to have a higher level.
Yeah,
but he can't get him confirmed.
Yeah, and there's lots of vacancies, and exactly right. So let's move down from the political level or let's move sideways from the political level to the civil service level. So Obama seems to be joining the Republicans in making the civil service kind of a whipping boy, endorsing pay freezes. I don't know where he stands on staffing reductions, but he's hardly been, all that much of a friend of the civil service. Why do you think that is? I mean, is that symbolic, the pay freeze? Oh, I need to cut the budget, therefore I'm going to freeze federal pay? Or
you would not believe, and I think there needs to be, and I've talked to a bunch of Republican pollsters who tell me this, you do some things in polling sometimes where you just ask for responses in return from people that you're polling. The amount of incorrect information that rank and file Republicans have when it comes to government workers is unbelievable. And it has created it has made the phrase government worker radioactive in politics right now. And the demeaning and the way that some parts of the Republican Party have beaten up on the public sector to the point of a way that, we thought the phrase bureaucrat had been abused over the last generation. It's like nothing you've ever. I mean, the vitriol that there is out there in some parts of the Republican Party, in the base, in this Tea Party, when it comes to the public sector and government workers. I mean, there are plenty of people that believe that somehow government's, jobs are getting protected and their jobs aren't. You know, this idea that, and so, I mean, in a bad economy, we shouldn't be surprised by these things, right? People are feeling pain, so they're lashing out at somebody else. And that lashing out over this economic downturn has been at government workers more than anybody else. I mean, I got a brother-in-law who's a principal in a very conservative. This guy my brother-in-law will never vote Democrat. He lives in Panhandle, Florida. But here he is working for the government, and he's got friends that are, attacking him for working for the government. And it's this, so that's the issue, right? I mean, there has just been this.
The White House sees that? I mean, you're talking
well, the
about
White House is
Republican,
basically not, I understand that.
Republican
And so the White House is in this, and what it has is it's seeped into the independent voter and the swing voter, and so they latch on to what they think they should, they can latch on to. Every once in a while the president will come out there and defend the government worker. He has done that. And he says, we got to stop demeaning, we got to stop running these folks down, this is, but he doesn't do it a lot because it's seen as bad politics.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had Paul Light up here this morning, and he was observing that if you poll the public, you're a close follower of the polls, they still want the services that government provides. And,
they just don't want anybody, they just want to pay for them.
I guess they don't want to pay for them, and they don't want the workers. And, we're seeing in the state and local level huge layoffs, teachers, and many, many, many teachers. And so that's a phenomenon that
it's irresponsible. Politicians that are elected to office and are running down government workers, it's shameless. I have to say it's offensive.
So let's talk a bit about the budget, and I'd be interested in your view of the sort of politics of the budget. At one point, there was a theory of that people were racing to be seen as the largest deficit hawk. That would be a disadvantage if you were seen as a dove on cutting the budget, and therefore Obama was going for the big deal and so on. Was that a political, and is it a political factor? And how is this whole deficit and debt thing, how does it look to you just purely on a political thing before we get to this substance?
Well, I think it's remarkable at how much the public, when you offer them two choices, they'll still tell you the number one issue in the country is jobs. The number two issue is the deficit. Okay, so it is the public rhetoric on the deficit has moved the issue up. And then when you ask, do you want government to essentially spend money to help the economic recovery? Should they prioritize, should they be focused on creating jobs or focused on cutting the deficit? When it comes to government, a majority pick focus on cutting the deficit, even in these economic times. So I think to me, that tells you how potent the issue really is, particularly, I think, with swing voters. Now, when then you ask that same question, you say, and what if that meant some cuts in Medicare and Social Security? Oh, we don't like that, So there's still a couple of untouchables. Medicare and Social Security are untouchable politically on that. But this deficit, so I think that there is, the question I have is there, can you win the political argument and be for some tax increases under the umbrella of being a deficit hawk? And I think that's what we're going to see. That's the game right now, right? That's where the president's at. He's saying, fine, you want to be a deficit hawk? I'll go $4 trillion. I just need almost $1 trillion in tax revenues. And, and I'll throw some stuff on Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. I'll figure out a way to sell it if you sell this. And, when you ask in isolation, we were just talking about this at lunch. When you ask in isolation, in general, having the rich pay more is something that a majority wants. It's not what a majority of the Republican Party wants. And right now, that party is more focused on its base, and it's more focused on making sure not to get crossways. And the fact is, politically, they're all right to do that, because none of them would survive a primary challenge. That's what found out in 2010 that even a conservative Republican like Bob Bennett, even a conservative, a mainstream conservative Republican like Lisa Murkowski, you're not going to survive these Republican challenges. So, and these conservative challenges if you're not careful. So that's why, it doesn't matter whether the swing vote is, the independent voter is in the middle there. So that's what the president, they're gambling politically, that being this balanced approach, that they'll win the process argument. We'll see.
Chuck, I've been curious about this for many years, actually, and now's a good time to talk about it. I don't quite understand why it is that the Republican Party is such a defender of of a class of people called the rich, because that class of people, depending on where you set the income scale, and Obama sets it at $250,000 for middle class, I guess, represents a very small segment of the population.
Right.
You're talking 10% or less of the population. Is it money in politics that makes the Republicans so defensive on this score, or what is it?
Look, I think it's more than that. I mean, that's the easy answer. You say, yes, of course, the
Yeah.
corporations have armies of lobbyists and they can fight for these things. But this has been a cultural shift inside that is, there's a whole generation of Republicans that have been brought up with the talking point that lower taxes creates jobs. And so it is not this isn't a case where, well, just some sector of the corporate America has this, this is the public policy that the Heritage Foundation has been churning out for 20 years. And so, they believe this. I mean, these are why you have two parties. This is an ideological. This is not a politics of convenience. This is ideology in every sense of the case. So, it's again, they've not been politically, until you're politically punished for your positions, you're not going to change them, right? I mean, that's sort of how American democracy works, for better or for worse. When you're punished for, and the president looks at the 2010 midterms and he feels like, okay, he was punished for not looking like a budget cutter, for looking like he was too big of government. So what's he done? He's tried to adopt as much of the small government rhetoric as he feels like he can do without losing members of his own party. So again, that's an election dictating a policy, even if his ideology is still different.
And we can remember Clinton saying the era of big government is over. That was when the government as a percentage of the GDP was around 20%. Now it's 25%.
Right.
And talking about the budget deal and spending cuts in particular, Chuck, I think this audience would be interested, and I'd be interested, to the extent you have any instinct, on how the pendulum is going to swing toward domestic discretionary spending. That is to say, the functions of the FBI, and all of the these are the core operations of government. Are they going to take a big hit, do you think?
Well, no. I mean, I don't think. Well, first of all, ATF's always going to take a hit, but that's a whole separate story. But I don't know per se if some of the law enforcement's going to take a hit. I would be surprised on that end. I'd be surprised on in Homeland Security if parts of it don't take a hit. I mean, I think you're going to see a huge. Pentagon's going to take a hit, and it's going to be a real haircut.
Yeah.
In just the middle deal, it's $50 billion a year over 10 years, and it could be more, and that's going to have a real impact on the, as I say, on Northern Virginia economy. That's just going to have a real impact on that front. So that's, when you look at the cuts, I feel like that's a lion's share of it is healthcare and defense, and then after that, it's a little bit here, a little bit there. Everything else is more trims here and there, trying to do these things. But what I'm waiting to see on the pendulum front is, right now, the average American doesn't necessarily get involved in what part of government do they interact with is local, what part of it is state, and what part of it is federal. They just know it's government, and they know it's a service. And what we're seeing happening on these state and local fronts, these massive cuts that are taking place because of all the forced balance budgets that have to take place in all of these states. What is the consequence of that in 2 years, in 4 years? I mean, we already see the popularity of these governors that were elected in 10 trying to do these cuts. They came in there, they said, and they're all doing what they campaigned on. It has plummeted. Every one of them's upside down in these states that had massive deficits, and they cut some services. And you wonder, what will that do? Then does the pendulum swing and say, we have a question and we ask in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll about once a quarter. Do you think government should be doing more or government should be doing less? And it's just been interesting, you know, right when Obama came in, it was about 54 more, 46 less. Then after health care, pendulum swung just the other way, 54 less, 46 more. Now we've noticed as the economy has flatlined and as everybody sees all these cuts taking place in their home states, the last time we asked that question, a majority, it was 51, said more. The government should be doing more versus less. You know, we don't put any other caveats on it. Just, you know, should government be doing more when it comes to the various problems in this country, or doing less? And we just, you know, we don't put deficit and all this stuff. And that is, you know, it's an ideological dividing line in general. You know, 90% of Democrats do more, 90% of Republicans doing less. But the movement is in the middle there with those independents. And the longer the economy stagnates, the more cuts you see on the state and local level. I wouldn't be surprised to see that pendulum keep going back into, well, now everybody's going to want government to do a little bit more.
Let's see. Let's talk for a moment. We touched on this at lunch, and I think people would be interested in a brief discussion of reorganization. So Obama made a big deal in I guess it was the last State of the Union about reorganizing the federal government, appointed Jeff Zients to get it done. And then there was he was first going to start on trade functions and export functions. Nothing has happened.
Right.
Yes.
And that was the easy one.
Yes.
We were told, I mean, I'd gotten a pretty long briefing on that, and they were, you know, it was not going to be, you know, they were not going to make the same mistakes Al Gore made, and they weren't going to have him go on Letterman breaking ashtrays, right? That's about my vision of the reinventing government, Rigo, back in the 90s. But, you know, I was told they're going to do this a piece at a time, and the easiest one is going to be trade and exports. And it's yet to come out. And why? I've been told every time they've written a plan, the congressional liaison folks will say, well, the subcommittee of X, the chairman of this X subcommittee is going to kill that because you're taking away their chairmanship, right? And that's ultimately, and it leads to the real problem, I would argue, in what's wrong with government today is Congress, and not in the sense of Congress, the people in it. It's how it's organized. And so to me, it's the same problem you had. Doesn't matter who's in charge. Seniority is no. Get rid of seniority so that the most qualified people are running the committees that they should be running, rather than them sitting there for 20 years out of whatever life they lived and not having any real-world experience by the time they get in charge of it. Get rid of seniority and streamline this committee process. You know, yes, I understand that, you know, the founders put Congress in there to gum things up, just to slow down so you don't have one president coming in here and making too much change too quickly. But now you're to the point where it's grounded, it grinds things to a halt. And Congress needs any CEO. If Congress were a private organization, they'd have brought in McKinsey a long time ago, right? You know, to say, just solve this. I mean, there's this one guy who's a member of Congress who's invented, I always use him as an example. I don't know him, but it was the guy who invented the Blue Mountain Christmas cards, those musical cards, right? Gets elected to Congress, and you think, well, there's a guy who made a fortune on the internet. Is he the chairman of the Small Business Committee when the Democrats? No. Shouldn't he be? There was no other member of Congress that had made $1 million on the internet, that had made $10 million on the internet, starting up a small business. I mean, you know, the fact that Congress doesn't logically work that way, you know, I'm not for, you know, it should be merit-based. We all live in a merit-based society, for the most part. We've gotten rid of a lot of seniorities, and sometimes it stinks. But when you're younger, you hate seniority. When you're older, you love it, right? But but ultimately, companies that are merit-based run smarter, run better. Congress should be done this way. So it's you're not going to reorganize government until somebody truly, really wants to reform Congress. And to me, it starts with seniority. You get rid of seniority, and you could get rid of a lot of. Do you know that there was? I don't mean to rant on this, but when Democrats were in charge of Congress, they brought in all of their committee chairs. Do you know that every one of them first got elected to Congress? 3 of them had gotten elected to Congress before Barack Obama was a teenager. Okay? All of them but one had gotten elected to Congress when the first Bush was, before Bill Clinton had ever been president. What world were they? They've only known, and so it is.
They don't tweet.
Well, they don't tweet. They don't. They don't live. They live in this. They live in a Washington bubble in the worst sense of the case. And of course, the ones with the most seniority are the ones that always win, which means they don't even face any swing voters. They don't even know what the real world. They just have their little compacted districts. Same on the Republican side.
Yeah, well, let me see. So I had a few questions about Congress, but now we've covered it. You've done it. Okay, no more Congress.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. We didn't want to talk about that much anyway.
It's easy to beat. It's easy to beat them up.
Yeah.
They're an easy punching bag. Sorry.
I have one more White House/Obama question for you. Obama has been criticized for leading from behind, or at least not from in front. For example, on the budget, he's never had a real plan out there.
Right.
On Afghanistan, he's always taking the middle ground, a little here, but not a lot, and whatever. On Libya, he's evaded Congress, and he's pushed to have the American role not seen as important as it goes on for months. Are these kinds of criticisms fair, do you think, in your estimation?
Look, it's who he is. He is not somebody, it is, if you go back and look at the history of the first time Obama ran for office, which isn't for Congress, it was when he became head of the law review in Harvard. And he became the consensus choice of the conservatives because he was a guy that would listen to them. And the other candidate wouldn't. And so they felt, even though they disagreed with him ideologically, they thought, here's somebody. This is just sort of, he always wants to be the guy that takes a little bit from here and a little bit from there. That's even the way he has formulated these debt talks. Today, he said, I've asked the leaders of Congress to come with their plans. Where's your plan? He's not going to do that, right? That's just, he wants to preserve this ability to, well, I'm going to take a little bit from here and take a little bit from there. And politically, you see why. He wants to look a little bit above it all, wants to be the adult in the room. I mean, you get the politics of it, but he's that way all the time when it comes to some of these things. It's just who he is. Yeah. People throw the whole community organizer thing at him, but that is he's a consensus guy, right? He doesn't have a rigid idea. I always call him he's a pragmatic. Bill Clinton was truly a political centrist. Obama's just as pragmatic as Clinton, sometimes more so, even if he's ideologically more to the left of Clinton. But he'll do some things that even Clinton wouldn't, because he doesn't like picking the big fight, in a weird way. And that is, some of his liberal critics, friendly critics, will get mad. They feel like he doesn't stiffen his spine. And, for instance, today he came out there. He did not demand the big deal. Instead, he never even uttered the word $4 trillion, which to me was code for, he said, I want the biggest possible deal. And he throws in the word possible. I mean, and I've asked him to come in. He's already sort of laying the groundwork for the compromise. Again, it is what average Americans, I think that's his number one asset, but it can come across, when you say the leading from behind, take the Libya issue. This was a case where we had to stand by NATO. And 99% of the time when we ask NATO to do something, the Brits and the French hate it, but they do it, right? Because we pay for NATO and they have to do it. Here's a case where they asked us to do something under the guise of NATO, which they rarely do. And this was one of those cases you had to do it. And to Europe, Libya was a very important oil provider. They needed to intervene on this. They couldn't do it themselves. They needed NATO because they needed us. So the president knowing how unpopular, he's going to lead, this is where the whole leading from behind phrase came from, originally was on this NATO thing. So he wants the least possible confrontation, but then he didn't, and I'd say this is one, I think, criticism that a lot of people will make of him quietly, even in the White House. He doesn't like doing backroom politics. And I mean this by the backslapping. Hey, Tim, what do you need? Everything good in your day? This is not who he is. And I think on Libya, had he done that just a couple of times, he wouldn't have had some of this percolate. He excuse me, delegated it too much. And Biden normally is that guy. Biden's his guy for that stuff, who likes to backslap more than Joe, right? But Biden was in the middle of the debt talks, and so on Libya, he wasn't really there to do it. Excuse me. And, it's not like Hillary and Gates were that enamored with the whole thing anyway, so they weren't overly selling it. So it's just stylistically who he is, right. And you're not going to change it.
Okay. All right. Let's move to the 2012 elections.
Okay.
And before we get to the presidential race, let's look at both the House outlook, influenced as it is by redistricting this year, and what the early tea leaves suggest to you on what will happen to the Republican majority. And second, the 2012 Senate outlook, where I think the Democrats are defending more seats, are they not, than the Republicans? A lot more. And so what's the prospect that the Senate could move over to Republican control? How are the elections looking in those two chambers of Congress to you?
If you like gridlock, you're going to love 2013. Because here's the most likely outcome right now, right? If you were to say, what's the, if you were to ask odds makers, what's the most likely outcome, right? A narrow Obama win. And if he wins, say, with 51%, he probably brings the Democrats control the House by, say, 2 seats. And Republicans win control of the Senate by about 2 seats. Okay, now govern, right? A less popular president, reelected, but with doing something that has not been done in 100 years, which is you get reelected with less vote than you did the first time. Almost I think it's not, I'm trying to think, I think it's only happened once in 100 years where a president got reelected with less of a percentage than time before. And I think if Obama wins, it's more likely than not, he's going to win with less than 53%, not more. Who knows? Michelle Bachmann's the nominee. That's a whole other story. So in the Senate, this cycle, if you just look back 12 years, in 2000, Democrats overperformed. They won 4 seats, even as Bush won the presidency. In 06, this was the Democrats' 6-year itch victory. So here in a year that on paper 2 years earlier, Democrats actually were defending more seats. They won control of the Senate. So all of a sudden, I think there's only like 9 Republican seats up in 2012 and something like 24 Democratic seats. So they're going to lose seats. The question is how many. You can already see the first 3 or 4 off the block. So it would be the biggest upset would be if somehow Democrats held control of the Senate. I mean, I think that's as close to a foregone conclusion. Not there yet. Anything can happen. But that's where Republicans feel that they have the best chance at winning anything is control the Senate first, holding the House second, and winning the presidency third, I'd say in that order, if you were to look at it from that respect. So, but redistricting has gone surprisingly well for Democrats, even as, this stuff's always a little overrated, but a few Illinois Democrats control, and I think it's where gerrymandering was invented, I think, in the state of, I think it was a guy from Illinois named Mander, right? I don't know. I think, I should get that history right. They've dramatically gerrymandered that. Florida passed an initiative for fair districts. That could balance out what should be Republican control of that process. California, 10 years ago, Nancy Pelosi orchestrated a status quo redistricting. This time they have a new law, and it's going to damage Republicans big time there. So, and then in places where where they're in control, they already maxed out in the 2010 elections, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan. So they're actually trying to figure out which Republican do they sacrifice? Because they can't, you know, they already won all these seats already. So redistricting is going better for Democrats than they expected. So the House is more in play. I mean, basically, I think who wins the presidency wins the House. I mean, there is a scenario in a very close election where Obama wins re-election and Republicans hold control of the House. But for the most part, I think if Obama wins with 51 or more, Democrats win control of the House. But not by a lot, and to the point of I do not believe Nancy Pelosi will be Speaker of the House. It will be that's a whole other story. But.
So let me see. I want to go through the Republican candidates, but first let's talk about money. The Dems have an early advantage on the Republicans. The Republicans have not raised as much as before, as NBC reported recently, right?
Yeah.
We've also got this phenomenon of these big independent groups, American
groups.
Crossroads, the conservative group is spending $5 million right now on advertising against Obama, right? Priorities USA, the liberal group, much less, but still out there with $750,000. All of this is pretty early. What can you reflect a minute about the role of money as you see it?
Well, look, nobody's going to win or lose this election. The presidency isn't going to be decided by money, but the House or Senate could be. I mean, that's where this stuff can have outsized influence. One, two. I would say that Republicans ought to be a little nervous that their candidates aren't raising the same amount of money that they were raising 4 years ago or 8 years ago. And part of that is there's a lot of Republican money that says, yeah, I'd rather give it to Rove and Gillespie and the outside groups. They can manage it better. They can run it better. Well, a lot of people had that attitude. A lot of Democratic donors had that attitude in 2004 with John Kerry. You cannot run a presidential campaign where you're outsourcing half your campaign apparatus to an outside group. Kerry tried that, and he lost. You know, Bush had a centralized operation for re-election, and he won. Kerry and they had at the time it was called Americans Coming Together, and this is where I think there's a real risk on this, and why the Obama campaign should not be overlooked, because they're going to run. They're running a very, you know, if I said that they are concentrating power on the West Wing, right, when it comes to the cabinet. They've certainly concentrated power on the re-elect and the DNC into one entity. And so in 2004, for instance, this group, Americans Coming Together, and the Kerry campaign, both were trying to rent from the same van company, right? And they couldn't speak to each other. And then one didn't have vans for Election Day turnout, and one did in Ohio. That's what happens when you're relying on multiple levels of groups or subcontracting out, to speak in some government terms here in the subcontracting, that you cannot run you're not going to have a well-oiled machine. And that automatically, I would just, you put the president, you favor him for re-election. Number one, there's a lot of reasons he should win. He'll have a lot of money issues. He doesn't have a divided party, which is the last two incumbent presidents to lose had a divided party. But he will have a well-oiled machine that is unified.
All right, let's take some questions from the audience. There was a microphone back here, but while they're getting up, I want to ask you, Romney, he's ahead. Is he catchable, and if so, by whom?
You know,
quick answer so we can
6 months ago, my line on Romney was, I don't know how he gets the nomination, and I don't know who stops him. And I still feel that way. There's a lot of ways this whole thing falls apart, but he certainly looks stronger today than I don't think any of us thought he would be. But let's see what happens. I think the only people that could stop him are Chris Christie or Paul Ryan if they chose to get in, both of whom are still sort of like 1% thinking about it.
What about Perry?
I don't think Perry might be able to beat him for the nomination, but Perry is Barry Goldwater. The president will win 40 states if Rick Perry's the nominee. Perry will not. But I can see him getting the nomination, and his path to the nomination is much more realistic than Bachmann, because he can credibly make an economic case that Bachmann cannot, while also doing this. If you believe there's sort of three parts to the Republican Party right now: the social conservative, values voters, the Tea Party conservatives, the economic voters, and the establishment. You grab two of the three credibly, and you make yourself passable with the establishment, which probably Perry can do that Bachmann can't. You know, Perry has been to Wall Street and talked to a CEO. As a governor of Texas over 10 years, you're going to do that. Bachmann, you know, so the establishment money might reluctantly come to Perry. I just don't see how Perry sells in suburban Philadelphia, in suburban Chicago, and the suburbs are going to decide this election. The suburbs always decide elections recently, and they're going to decide this one.
Okay, now do we have a question out there? I'm not seeing one. We have a microphone right there.
I thought you were
No?
raising your hand. Sorry. Great.
All right. What about T-Paw? Is he gone?
Well, Pawlenty's,
Yeah.
I think we'll find out. You can't be running with somebody from your own state who's been a member of Congress for about 10 minutes, lapping you in the field in both money, organization in the first state. So until he gets past Bachmann, I don't see how he gets past Romney.
He called her record in Congress non-existent. I thought that was kind of
Well,
harsh.
it's factual.
It's
No, I mean it is, but it does sound harsh. It is factual.
Yes, question here.
No, it's been a really good session, and I really appreciate all the comments today. I just wanted to ask kind of a follow-up. You know, a lot of the people here today have been talking about it, and we've been talking about it back in my office, but one of the big issues that we see facing us today in this government is that the very nature of our political system sort of inhibits our ability to make any type of long-term planning. And looking around the world, we see emerging economies, emerging world powers, and these may be folks that have different ideologies, but one thing we can say for sure is that they have long-range planning, and it seems to work. It works in Germany as well, with the European Union, one of the strongest economies in the world. And you were talking earlier a little bit about, you know, one of the big problems of government is the structure of Congress and how it organizes itself, forms committees, and makes decisions. I don't know the answer to this. How would we initiate such a change in the fundamental way in which we do business?
Look, we're all waiting for the radical middle to just scream, I can't take it anymore, right? Everybody's like, when is somebody, and so one of the things we didn't touch on, and where it could come from, is I think we are ripe for another run at an independent candidacy, okay, at a third-party movement that isn't permanent, but that is of the moment right now, right? That's why this debt ceiling business is a real challenge to the two-party system if they're not careful. If more and more people come to the conclusion that Washington can't get it done and the two parties can't get it done, then they will at least be open-minded to a third option. Now, the problem with third options in the past is you need a personality to sort of organize around. Ross Perot was that person. You know, if there were a sane Ross Perot, could this person catch fire? And I think so. The problem is who? You know, 25 years ago, if you polled people generally had a pretty positive opinion generically of business leaders. Right now, business leaders aren't thought of that much more, held in that much more high regard than political leaders, certainly not us in the media. You know, we have this negative attitude about everybody. We're mad at corporate CEOs for getting all these pay raises and doing all this business and, you know, getting the government to bail them out. We're mad at politicians for not getting the job done. We're mad at the media for being too ideological. We're mad at our religious institution for not managing their business. You know, you look at we're mad at the sports world for lying to us about the sporting record. I mean, even in our hobbies, you know, we're finding out people have been lying to us and not telling us full stories. So there's this distrust. So I don't know who the entity or person is. It's there for the taking. You know, if somebody comes up there and says, look, it's crazy. But the problem is I don't know if that person could instantly get the credibility. I mean, I kind of think it needs to be a recovering politician at this point. You know, a recovering Democrat or a recovering Republican that get together, you know, and just say, you know what, that's it. I don't care. I'm running for one term. I don't care. I'm willing to break the system. You know, this is ridiculous. I can't take it anymore. Congress, and I don't know why. Well, we know why nobody, even when you're in the minority, you don't want to fight for real reforms of Congress, because if you fight to get rid of seniority, you may be getting rid of your own chairmanship, right? If you win. You know, remember, what was it, when the Republicans got to their 8th year of controlling the House, suddenly they wanted to get rid of term limits for their chairmanships? They created these, oh, he got a waiver for another 2 years. You're like, well, you know, you gotta, this, you know, I'm harping on it. I absolutely believe that seniority, number one, is a destructive element in the U.S. Congress. And until you get rid of that, I don't think you can truly reform government in a way that a lot of people would like to see it reformed.
Well, you know, I think that's a great question on which to end, but I'm going to have the final question because our time has run out. Chuck, are we going to see you on the nightly news tonight?
Well, yeah, no, we're covering the more of the debt talks. In fact, I go back. I think they start right now in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And you know, they're trying this middle plan, which is the one that was negotiated with Biden, which will include a big, like I said, most of the cuts are essentially in 2 buckets: healthcare and defense.
So the answer is yes, we're going to see
Yeah,
you on the
we
nightly
will.
news.
Sorry.
And we're going to see you on the Daily Rundown
I know,
tomorrow.
that's all right. Thank
Please
you, Mr.
join me
Clark.
in giving Chuck a big round of applause. Okay.